Hey, it's Ben with Lions SRD here. Really quickly, thanks for stopping by. And if you want to catch our other shows here on sportsradiodetroit.com, like Out of Bounds, the SRD Road Show, Laugh Tracks, Spinning the Wheels, any of our great selections, you easily can. Just go to Apple's iTunes, Spotify, right here on Podbeam. You can go directly to the website, sportsradiodetroit.com, and basically get all the content you want. We just appreciate you stopping by, and if you like it, give us a good review so other people can find it. Now, Lions SRD.
You're listening to Sports Radio Detroit.
Let's go out and leave it all on the field. It's going to start with us. We got to make plays in order for us to win. All you got to do is do your assignment, nothing more. Let's go. Playmakers on three. 1, 2, 3, playmakers.
Matthew leans in, he's got it, wants to throw. Pressure comes up the screen, got it to Riddick. Riddick to 15, Riddick 10, Riddick 5, Riddick end zone! Touchdown, Detroit Lions! He's to Abdullah, right side, got a hole. Abdullah 20, Abdullah 10, shakes the man at the 8, and dances into the end zone. Touchdown, Detroit Lions! The action fake, he's going to throw. Rhodes does, it is picked up alive! Coming back the other way off the deflection. Glover Quinn, back to the house. Touchdown, Detroit Lions! 38 seconds left. Bradford's got it on third down. Sets and throws. It is intercepted. Darius Slay's got it at the 30. Slay inside the 25. Matthews got it. Looks right. Throws. Caught. Golden Tate. End zone. Touchdown, Detroit Lions. Barkley takes the snap. Back to pass. Looks. Rolling. Hit. Still alive. Now he's not. Going down. Sack. Back outside the 50-yard line. Kerry Hyder's got it. Backing up, looking for somewhere to go. Stafford's going to tuck it and run. Stafford at the 5, 3, 2, 1, end zone. Touchdown, Detroit Lions. Oh, Matthew took it home.
Lions SRD on sportsradiodetroit.com.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Lions SRD. The Lions are officially done with the playoffs. That means Week 17 is, well, doesn't really matter. So if you want to tune in to Brett Hundley and the Packers coming into Detroit, more power to you. I'm Ben Salagi, joined with Marty Stouffer, and it was an ugly Christmas. Well, not for me, and I'm sure not for Marty, but it was for Lions fans. Marty, how was your Christmas? Or was it dampened by what happened on Sunday?
It was both. It was a good Christmas, but at the same time, I was so thoroughly disgusted with that Lions game. How do you lose to one of the only teams with a worse running game than you, and they get pummeled by that running game? I don't understand it. I was so disgusted.
Yeah, we'll dive into that hard. But I hope everyone's Christmas was great. I really do. It's it's the time of year where your hearts are full. You're spending time with your loved ones. Hopefully, you didn't talk about politics because that can ruin things and turn that sideways really quick. But other than that, we have a pretty good show for you today, I think, based on the circumstances. And let's dive into that game against the Bengals. And I am freely going to admit this, and if this makes you turn off this podcast, and if we've only done it now for a minute and a half or so, more power to you. I freely admit I did not watch the last 8.5 minutes of this game. Why? Well, because I was going to church. There was a 4 o'clock mass that I had to attend. But also in part because when it was 17-16, either the Lions were going to win or they were going to find a way to just blow it against a really bad team. And when you were looking at the stats, and this is, Marty, you kind of hit on it. Lions and Bengals, we talked about it last week. Their running games are awful. And awful is to put it nicely. Lions outgained on the season the Bengals by 5 rushing yards. On average, they only beat them by 0.4 of a yard. So that's, like a 1.5 feet. Anywho, on Christmas Eve, the 32-ranked team rushing the football in the National Football League got 142 yards. Giovanni Bernard was the one getting most of those carries. On Christmas Eve, he had 23 carries for 116 yards. And guess what, folks? That is more than his previous 2 games combined against the Bears and the Vikings. His only other game where he actually broke 70 yards, if you're curious, was against the Steelers. On December 4th, he had 77 yards. Outside of that, he made Detroit look pretty awful. So, Marty, I know you're foaming at the mouth. You want to break your chain and go at it. Let us know your thoughts.
It's become increasingly obvious that the defensive line can't get anything done right. Now, I'm not going to point out one player because they were collectively bad. There was no pass rush. There was no run stuff. There was nothing. They might have not even taken the field. But that, as bad as that is, it goes to show guys like Warlow, Tahir Whitehead, and my boy Jared Davis, they can't stop anybody either right now. And I don't know if it's a mental thing. I don't know if it's I don't know. I don't want to say it's a lack of talent. Whitehead has shown he can be a baller. We know Jared Davis is a rookie. Maybe he hit that rookie wall. I don't know. But they just looked bad. The passing game started off. The passing defense started off real crisp, looking real good, and then they disappeared as well. I mean, AJ Green. I don't think AJ Green had a monster statistic game, but he had some big catches that just kind of embarrassed Darius Slay a little bit. Mm-hmm. And it was just an overall poor defense. I was so disgruntled watching that team, and you know, I live in Pittsburgh, so of course, you know, the Steelers are, you know, the messiah of the football world. So of course, I get harassed a lot. And one of the things I got the most this week, and this is so stupid because it doesn't make any sense. Oh, Lions have a $140 million quarterback, but he can't make the playoffs. Oh no, you're right. It's not his job to tackle Gio Bernard. No, you're right. It's not his job to pick off Andy Dalton. Like, yeah. I don't know what Matt Stafford's contract has anything to do with the defense, but I mean, I'm sure if it was up to Stafford, he'd be doing everything he could to be on that field to make some stops. Just knowing how competitive he is. But it was just so disheartening because you had one of the top ranked defenses in the first half of the year, and now it looks like the same old Detroit Lions, and it's disheartening.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. It's I think discouraging, disheartening, anything with a dis in front of it is probably going to be the right word to use for this defense, because 3 weeks ago when Detroit was facing the Ravens, and we know this very, very well, the Ravens were near the bottom of the NFL in passing. They would only get about 160 yards through the air. Joe Flacco, when he faced the Lions 3 weeks ago, had that in a half. So it's kind of telling, right, when that happens. When you're facing arguably the worst teams and it's not their strengths, and when they come in against the Lions, all of a sudden they become strengths. Like, that's something that I just don't get. And something that else I don't get either is this is a Bengals team that's parting ways with Marvin Lewis. Like, it has been widely reported for the past 2 weeks that Lewis is gone. His tenure in Cincinnati is over. And yet you can't beat him. Like, that just goes to show that there's just a comedy of errors on a lot of levels. Granted, yes, I get it, right? You still don't have a healthy Ziggy Ansah. Fine. You have a 50-year-old Dwight Freeney. Fine. You have no Hello Inada. Okay. But at some point, you have to scheme for that. At some point, you have to help out your team. Whether it's playing Akeem Spence in the middle instead of the outside, because we all know he barely gets a pass rush. He barely generates any defensive push on the line. We know Zidell has disappeared after the first 6 games of the year, and it's because he's getting double and almost triple teamed, so he's not doing anything. You have to figure out a way around that. And when you have a team that cannot run the football in the Bengals, where are the run blitzes? Where's the pressure? I mean, yes, Dalton was sacked for 3 times on the game, but outside of that, there wasn't a lot of quarterback hits. A guy in Ziggy Ansah, like I just mentioned, he's not 100%, led the team with 3 quarterback hits. Akeem Spence had 1. Outside of that, they couldn't really pressure him. And it's just, that's the thing that bothers me the most, is when you're facing two teams on opposite ends of the spectrum. One can't run the football, another one can't pass the football, yet when they're going up against your defense, they have the best games in their season. Like, come on. That is just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Like, there has to come a time and place, because the week before, the Lions' run defense against the Bears looked pretty darn good. They held the Bears to 43 yards on the ground. The week before that, Tampa Bay was still able to run all over Detroit. They used 5 different running backs. But no running back had more than, they couldn't even eclipse the 60-yard mark. But yet you have the Bengals, who are 32 in the league, and you have one of them breaks off 116 yards. To me, if you couple that in with Marvin Lewis already basically out of a job in Cincinnati, it's pathetic. And pathetic's putting it nicely. I mean, there's no excuse for that. And I even said on, on Sunday, on Christmas Eve, that I'm done. Like, I want new coaches. I don't want just Jim Caldwell gone. This is gone a lot further than this. And I know we've talked about it, Marty, and we're not going to dive into it deeply because it does. It gets kind of annoying week in and week out. But there was a time when I asked if getting new coordinators would help save Jim Caldwell for a year or two. And it might. But I'm already at that breaking point where you need a new offensive coordinator. You need a new defensive coordinator. You're not getting it done. You're not scheming well. We know that with the Lions running game, they still can't run the football. They can't find a way to get any balance on offense whatsoever. I don't even know why teams are biting on a play-action fake whenever Stafford gives it, but they do. It's just, I'm done. Like, I am beyond done. I want new coaches, whether it's across the board or underneath Caldwell and the board. I want new coaches because it's obvious that these guys can't scheme either to punish and take away and exploit a weakness or not. And if you can't do that in the span of, 4 weeks in a month, bookending by teams that were really bad passing the football and then really bad running the football, then you don't deserve to have your job. No one should have the best games of their season against your defense. That is just inexcusable and indefensible.
Yeah, it really is, and it's not. I don't want to say it's because of a lack of talent, because I don't believe that's the case. I definitely think it's because of scheming. I don't know if Terrell Austin's out there calling blitzes when they should be calling pass protection. I don't know, but something is horribly wrong when the Ravens can't pass the ball for more than 160 yards a game and Flacco gets that in a half. When the Bengals can't run for 100 yards collectively as a team and Gio Bernard's ripping that off by himself. I mean, something's horribly wrong when that comes against your defense. I mean, I'm sure a lack of talent may play into it somewhere, but I can't point out one guy aside from like Akeem Spence maybe that I would sit there and say this guy needs to sit because he's offering nothing. Like the secondary's playing they're playing at their highest level, but they can't do anything when the front seven isn't helping. It's to me, Terrell Austin's got to go, and I think he's going to, and I think JVC is going to be gone too. I don't know if Caldwell will. I've defended him long on this podcast, and I still will because I just don't like many candidates out there. But I'm at the point now where if they're going to replace him, it just needs to be a full-on sweep, replace the whole coaching staff from coordinators and everybody. Just start over. Yeah,
I mean, at this point, might as well. But one thing that and this, I'm going to defend Jim Caldwell here because I get why people are upset he didn't throw a challenge flag. But I saw the play, and Marty, I'm sure you saw the play, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was
third. Just the one where Dean Blandino was saying something we're seeing in slow motion now. Is that the one?
Yeah, when it was 3rd and 28,
yep.
When the Lions were pinned all the way inside their 5-yard line. Yeah, it's like you could tell on TV it was not a catch. Like, I've seen it. I've seen video clips of it because it's been all over any type of media you look at. And yes, there's times where Jim Caldwell doesn't throw his challenge flag. Most of those times, you are completely in the right and rail on Jim Caldwell for this. You can. And I'm right there with you in lockstep on it. But it was clear Golden Tate lost control of the ball because it was stripped as he was hitting the ground. It was ruled incomplete, and I'm sorry. I'm not going to get on Caldwell's back and say, hey, why didn't you throw the flag? Like, I get, yes, it was still a 2-point game at that point. I get that. But if it's that close of a game, I can't fault him for not using a challenge flag because, one, it looked pretty clear it wasn't a catch, and two, you need that timeout in a close game. Because you know at some point, and I'm going to go all the way back to when they played the Falcons, where a timeout could save you. And I'm not going to sit here and say it was a coaching miscue. I think if you do that, then yes, you are just being unfair to Jim Caldwell because there's plenty of other instances where you can get on his back. I don't think that was one of them.
I agree with you. Like you said, it was pretty obvious Tate didn't complete the catch. So I had no problem with him not throwing that flag.
Yeah, I mean, of all the things to get on Jim Caldwell about, that being one of them, I can't be there. I can't be there with you. But let's move on to something that actually came out after Christmas, speaking of Jim Caldwell, which got a lot of traction here locally around Detroit, and it was an interesting column, to say the least. And it was written by Joe Hayes, and he writes for the, I believe, Times Herald out in Port Huron, and he kind of loosely tied Jim Caldwell's hot seat to racism. Now, it was published in the Detroit Free Press, and you read the article, he has a very sound argument for keeping Caldwell, and that some of the praise is ill-founded, right? That, he should be immediately fired for his job. I mean, there was a stat where before Caldwell came to this team, the Lions, the past 14 seasons, only made the playoffs once. Jim Caldwell, since he's been here, you can argue has turned the Lions into a playoff contender every single year. He made it, 2 out of 3 years, and then it took to week 16, game 16 of last year to try to win the division, and it didn't matter. So the Lions have always pretty much used all the way up to week 17, game 16, basically, getting into the playoffs or winning possibly a division title. And he talks about it. Hayes talks about this in his column. And it's a very good logical argument. But then all of a sudden, it takes a very drastic left turn. And this is where I think it's more personal for Joe Hayes than I think it is for any of us. Obviously, he's been ridiculed at his job, but I can say this with impunity that what journalist hasn't? I mean, I get emails for a lot of different things, covering high school sports, and this is just high school. Literally, it doesn't mean anything. There's no contracts on the line. There's maybe some scholarships on the line, but only at the top 1% of high school kids will get an opportunity to play at the next level. So when I say that a kid doesn't make all area or whatnot, it's not a indictment on your kid, but I get emails saying the same thing, but it doesn't seem like the emails that Joe Hayes are anywhere in comparison to that. And he makes up some pretty good points. And again, the left turn comes out where he starts talking about race. Because there's no evidence that Jim Caldwell, that at least Mr. Hayes used in his column, there's no evidence, there's no support that says that people have attacked Jim Caldwell because he's African American. There's no support of him talking directly with Caldwell. Before we get into the column further, this was Jim Caldwell's thoughts on the column, and if race has any bearing into his hot seat.
And probably comes as a great surprise to you guys. I don't read any articles. As good as you are, I've never read any of your articles, never listened to the radio, never. So all the stuff that you guys write and those kinds of things, as well as people nationally, I learned that lesson back in the 80s. So it's been a while, but no, I've never felt that way.
Obviously bigger than what you read, though. I mean, that's a pretty serious accusation, so I just wanted to make sure that the perception was not there from an individual standpoint.
What would you say to people who believe that to be the case?
I'm not saying anything. I just answered his question. Why do I have to go into it in any more detail? And that's end of story. Well, they can read it and come to their own conclusion. It doesn't have anything to do with what I respond. I told him, he asked me a question. I said no, and that's the way I feel. You've never heard me blame anything at any point in time, make up any excuses about anything that we've ever done, and I never will. I've been around a long time. My father wouldn't allow me to do it when I was a kid, so no difference today.
So here's where it makes that weird left turn. And I'm sure Joe Hayes is a fine journalist. I'm sure he writes a really good game story, really good feature. But this is where the column loses me, right? And this is where it goes. Let's be real. It's obvious that many fans don't like Caldwell, and it doesn't have anything to do with winning. For many Lions fans, Caldwell can do nothing right. These are the same fans that called African Americans thugs for quietly taking a knee during the national anthem. These are the same people who cheered with approval when President Donald Trump called football players sons of bitches. Now fans have the best coach in modern Lions history in their sights. And no, it's just not because of a terrible loss to Cincinnati, but for many it's because he has brown skin. He goes on to say in the column that, and this is literally 2 paragraphs later, so I'm not really omitting anything, but he says, but for the rest of us, we're faced with yet another lesson on just how far we have left to go as a society. I remember 2017 for many reasons, but at the forefront of my mind will be the racism I experienced and similar experiences of many others. I'll remember sitting in a waiting room with 6 to 8 doctors concerned about my newborn daughter's health, only to be bombarded with messages at the same time from people in the community about how a black man couldn't run the Times Herald sports section. One message, I said I was a failure. Another person said he couldn't wait to see me to bash my face in. Others said that I should be embarrassed for letting the community down. Throughout the year, these messages continued and crescendoed recently when I took off for 2 weeks to spend time with my family. Nearly every other day, someone has had something negative to say or hateful to say about me, and after a while, like with Caldwell, the harsh words just roll off your back. It's just what many African Americans will experience over the course of our lives. So I understand if many people simply think this is a column about me pulling the race card. It's no longer surprising to see people run away from conversations about race. But after thinking through my own experiences in 2017 and watching from afar what Caldwell has endured, it's clear I have learned yet another life lesson through sports this year. Ultimately, this time, that includes the understanding of how racism still continues to affect African Americans tied to sports, even on a national stage. So, after hearing that, it seems, because again, there's no other evidence that Jim Caldwell's received racism threats or anything like that, that Mr. Hayes has decided to tie his own experiences in sympathy for Caldwell. Now, I'm sure on some level, that works. But for me, that doesn't work. You need to have evidence of this. And I'm not discounting what happened to Mr. Hayes through emails of his listeners and his subscribers and anything like that up in Port Huron. Because I've been down that road in a very loosely similar thing. Granted, it's not tied to race, but it is tied to my job and how I cover things. And it's tough. It's tough to deal with. But if you're going to say it has anything to do with race, you need to at least have a conversation with Caldwell, which he says he never has had. And Caldwell has said the same thing. And you need to have examples, whether it's social media, Twitter accounts, Facebook comments, or whatever, that have shown this. And he doesn't bring those attributions to the table. And for that, I have no idea, outside of just the clicks and the conversation that it's going to cause by the Free Press, to run this piece. Because outside of that, it doesn't have, outside of the personal experience Joseph Hayes had, it doesn't tie into Caldwell at all. Marty, when you read this, I know, granted, you're out in Pittsburgh, but you like to follow Lions news closely, so you read a lot of local stuff. What was your thoughts on Joseph Hayes' column on Tuesday?
He lost me when he that whole article lost any credibility when he started talking about the racism. Ben, you know me, I'm all over social media with the Lions, whether it's Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, whatever. I'm all over it. I have never once, and this is to the fan base's credit, because, there are idiots in every fan base. I've never seen one racist comment, not one, about Jim Caldwell. Now, I'm not saying I've seen every single comment ever posted, but I've never seen a racist one. The people knocking Caldwell, they're talking about his play calling. They're talking about his substitutions. They're talking about, for me, they're talking about Amir Abdullah getting a start over Tion Green, which I don't understand. I've never seen a racist thing. So for me, that article loses any credibility as soon as he starts talking about racism. And it completely loses credibility when he can't tie anything to him. It sucks that Mr. Hayes has gone through this, but why the Free Press would even feel fit to publish something that has no credible evidence is beyond me. And that to me is just they just want the clicks. They just want people to view what's going on. And like I said, it lost any credibility when he made it about race.
Yeah, that's where I have an issue with it. It's just the attributions. If there was something, like I said, whether it's a comment section, whether it is in an email to you saying, hey, I don't like Jim Caldwell because he is a blank, 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 then use it. You can use that as attribution. And the fact that there's no attribution of this, I'm not discrediting what happened to Joseph Hayes while he's on his beat up in Port Huron with the Times Herald. I'm not discrediting anything like that. It's just if you're going to write something like that, you need to have attribution. You need to have you have to back it up, because it paints not just Caldwell, who we know is on the hot seat, and he's on the hot seat because this team easily could have gone 5-0 in their last 5 games. Marty, you said they were probably going to go 2-3, 3-2, which they are. That's the range they're going in. That's why this team's a failure. It's his body of work that's what's leading to this conversation. It's not the content of his character, because for all intents and purposes, Jim Caldwell seems to be a very upstanding guy. He will never throw a player under the bus. He'll never throw a former coach under the bus. He accepts all responsibility for what happens on and off the field with the organization. He represents the Lions organization with class. He does. He does a great job with that. But it's the body of work that he does with this team. And they're at a sticking point. This Lions team is perennially 9-7, 7-9. Sometimes, yes, with Caldwell, they've gone 11-5. This year, they should have gone 11-5. At worst, 10-6. You're not getting there. That means you're not getting the job done. And when you're not getting the job done, then people have a right to question if you're good enough for that job. And yes, Caldwell has 2 Super Bowl rings, one as a head coach, one as an offensive coordinator. But when he won it with Indy, he had Peyton Manning and still the cast of characters that Peyton Manning had. And he had one of the best centers in Jeff Saturday that the league has ever had. The Lions don't have that. Not yet. So the talent's different. And maybe you can say to a point, yes, Caldwell is overachieved because maybe the Lions aren't that talented. Because obviously you look at the Pro Bowl votes, the Lions are only sending one player. They're not going to send Matthew Stafford in. Maybe they do again as an alternate. But outside of that, you're not seeing Golden Tate going, which is kind of a travesty. He's one of the best wide receivers in the game. So maybe you can have an argument that Jim Caldwell is doing a lot with a little. You could easily say that here in Detroit, but you cannot say it's for the it's on the color of his skin. I just don't see that. I don't know where that's coming from because again, there's no attribution about it. Maybe, like you said, Marty, maybe it is out there, but it's up to Joseph Hayes to provide that as part of his argument. Outside of that, it's completely hearsay, and it makes the argument flimsy at best. And it does. It makes the Freep look bad for basically a clickbait article because there's no attribution to it. And any good sports editor would have, before they ran it, be like, hey, you have a great piece here. Do you have anything else to back this up? And if he says no, then maybe you don't run it. But that's something that's obviously a big part of what's going on. The Lions are still preparing for Green Bay. But I have one other topic, Marty, before we get into Green Bay and how important it would be for the Lions to actually sweep the Packers. But we know the Browns are one game away from joining the 2008 Detroit Lions of being the only teams to go 0-16. Do you want the Browns to join the Lions, or do you want the Lions to be the sole owner of that terrible record?
No, I want the Browns to join. I'm so sick of hearing about how the Lions 0-16 are the worst franchise ever. No, I'm sick of hearing it. It's run its course. We've been hearing it for 9 years now. I want Cleveland to go winless. I really, really do, because then, but that happens, and everybody's gonna go, well, it's Cleveland. Well, yeah, okay, fine, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it takes a lot of circumstances to get to that point. Mm-hmm. Like it really does. Like Cleveland has talent on that team, not clearly not enough to win games, but I mean it's bad. I mean I want to see them. I want to see them go winless for the sheer fact that I'm so sick of the Lions being the only ones in that category. Yeah,
no, I'm with you. Like I'm someone that let's have another team join our misery. But ESPN actually had an interesting column feature with Mike Rothstein, who covers the Lions here locally for ESPN, and Pat McManaman, who covers the Browns. And it was a simple question: if both of these teams, the 2008 Lions or the 2017 Browns, who would win? Marty, who do you think would? Because I know you remember a lot of who was on those teams. Who do you think would win, the Lions or the Browns?
I'm gonna have to say the Browns.
Ooh,
I think they actually would have beaten the Lions then. Because I mean, sure, you don't see any Browns quarterbacks running out of the back of the end zone with the opposition just laughing at them. I mean, it just you don't see that, and that's not a shot at Dan Orlovsky. Well, I guess it is a shot; it's a veiled shot, but it's this Browns season has just been through play calling, it's been through horrible officiating in several games. I mean, it's been through a carousel of quarterback, it's been through injuries, it's been through a lot. Now, if Josh Gordon's there a full season, does that help them? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I think Deshaun Kaiser could very well be their future guy. I think he has the potential to be their guy, but to pin the season on him and him alone, they fed that kid the rock when he wasn't ready, and that's Cleveland's fault. And I just hope Kaiser doesn't take the Harrington route and just completely, fold and just completely collapse. I think Harrington could have been a quality player if he would have had some pieces around him. I think the Browns have more talent on defense now than the 2008 Lions did then. So yeah, I have to go with Cleveland.
See, it's interesting because we know John Kitna got hurt in that year,
yep.
So that's why Orlovsky played and made that, boneheaded play that will live in infamy. But the Lions still had Calvin Johnson, They had John Kitna again. If he was healthy, if he was playing in this game, I think, sadly, the Lions have the edge at quarterback there. Kevin Smith was the running back in 2008. It's something that maybe it would have been a push, at the running back spot. But if you have arguably one of the best wide receivers in the league in Calvin Johnson, I would give the nod to the Lions over the Browns. That's just me, because to me, both teams are equally terrible when it comes to coaching decisions and
yes,
and making plays. But you also have to look at the Browns have given up a league high 44 touchdowns, and 27 of those, which is the sixth highest in the league, have come through the air. So I think if you have a healthy John Kitna throwing to Calvin Johnson, I honestly think that's going to win the day. Outside of that, it's just something that it's really funny, because last year the Browns were close to going 0-16. Granted, they didn't. I think they won their last 2 games of the year. If not, they only won 1. Anywho, the Lions obviously in 2009 improved off their record, and before 2008 didn't go like 1-15 or 2-14 like the Browns did. So I think this Browns team is worse than that Lions team, and I would have to give the edge to the Lions. I just would. But it's a fun, it's just a fun topic to talk about, obviously. And
let's not forget too that the Browns lost the best player, and I'll say it, the best player in their franchise history, Joe Thomas.
Yes,
that offensive line just completely fell apart when Joe Thomas got hurt for the year. No matter who they put out there, they were getting beaten like a bass drum. They were awful. So when you lose a player like that, so I see your Calvin Johnson and I counter with Joe Thomas. So it's kind of like it would be a fun matchup to see. I agree with you. If Kitna plays the whole season, he's not hurt, and we don't see Dan Orlovsky, the Lions are probably the better team. But I have to go with Cleveland.
Interesting. No, and that is completely fair. I'm not going to sit here and be like, no, that's wrong. No, that is completely fair. So, last topic. Obviously, the Lions have one last game to play, and it's against the Packers. And it's I don't know. It's something that the Lions haven't really swept the Packers in a season. They've split with the Packers, but they haven't swept recently the Packers in this series. And you have a very rare opportunity to where you could do it. And they've had consecutive losses, but those losses have come in 1998 and then the following year in 1999. I'm looking all the way back, going to 2004, and the last time the Lions have swept the Packers is in 1991. The Lions beat the Packers 21-17, and they beat the Packers earlier in that year 23-14. Now, granted, yes, Aaron Rodgers is not playing in this game, which led to an interesting debate whether the Packers should be forced to cut and drop Aaron Rodgers because he was thrown on IR. It was a topic that was discussed on Sunday at nauseum because it's against the rules. You have to be put on IR with a brand new injury, and they didn't. They basically let him play one game, and then they threw him back on IR instead of benching him, which is an organizational faux pas. It's something that Green Bay should have just benched him and not put him on IR. Granted, the advantages of putting him on IR is that it opens up a roster spot for someone if you want to get another look at him for 2 weeks. But again, we're not really going to dive into that because it's Green Bay, and yeah. But the last time the Lions swept the Packers was in 1991. So the Lions could do that this year. And like I said, granted, Aaron Rodgers is not playing, but it's a very simple question for you, Marty. Do you think the Lions can sweep the Packers on Sunday at 1 o'clock?
Yeah, I think they can.
Do you think they
I don't really
will?
care if they do.
Well,
I don't know. I'm of a split mind here. Do I want to see our starters, our franchise pieces, Stafford, Tate, so on and so forth? Do I want to see them playing in a meaningless game? Not really. I don't want to, because there's always that chance for injury. I don't want to see Stafford get hurt in the last game of the year when he's playing for nothing and have to miss half the year because he has to get, shoulder surgery or whatever the case may be. But at the same time, whether it's Aaron Rodgers or not, yeah, I kind of want to sweep Green Bay because that'll end on a positive note. That'll give us 10-6, 9-7,
9-7.
That would give us 9-7, which is I think that's about where I predicted at the beginning of the year, something along those lines. Like I said, I'm of a split mind. If they're going to play everybody, then there's no reason for us to not go out there and step on their throat and just embarrass Green Bay, because how many times has that happened to the Lions where Green Bay just come out and just flat-footed us? I mean, it needs to happen. If they're going to play everybody, we better be dropping 35 to 40 points on them, because Green Bay's not a good team. I don't care what anybody says. They've got the mystique around them, and I think people, they automatically see Green Bay and they just automatically think how good they are. They're really not. They have some good playmakers, but they're not that great of a team this year. Not saying Detroit is, but this is a game where if we're going to play everybody, we need to go out there and step on their throat.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I think the Lions should beat the Packers. They did it in Green Bay. Granted, Brett Hundley was still a little green behind the ears a little bit, but this is a team that you should easily beat. I mean, you have a home game. It's the last game of the year, and all the Lions players are saying the right things when it comes to Caldwell. They believe in the guy. They like playing for him. Well, then win the game, because this could be
and I believe they do. I really do. I think they want him as their coach.
Yeah, well, prove it. Win for the guy. I mean, it's going to come to that. If you really like Jim Caldwell, start winning for him. I mean, do anything, because if you lose to Brett Hundley and the Green Bay Packers, it doesn't matter what happens. It could be a 31-30 win, Green Bay over Detroit. Caldwell is done. Like, there's nothing that would save him, because you cannot lose this game. Like, it's not a must win. No, you know what? Screw it. I'll say a must win game, because you can't. You can't lose to Brett Hundley and the Packers. And if you do, then yes, it's the same old Lions, and bring in whoever you want, whether it's basically any coach. I mean, at this point, I'm willing to take any change, because if you lose to the Packers, my God, you do not deserve to have your job or your contract or anything like that. I mean, it's just a fact of life. And it would be as bad as the Jaguars not removing the tarps all the way at their home field for the Everbank Field for their playoff game. They're still going to keep the tarps, because the capacity goes, if you remove the tarps, to 84,000. And if you have the tarps on, it's only 65,000. And this is going to be the first playoff game in Jacksonville since January 23rd, 2000. So it'd be just that insane, just as an example. If you're trying to think of, well, how insane would it be? That's how insane it would be. It really would. But outside of that, like I said, there's nothing really else to talk about. Marty, is there any last things that's come into your mind or anything like that?
Just a few things. This game, Lions aren't playing for anything. I really, really want to see them feature Tion Green this week. I know I keep beating that drum. I don't even want to see Amir Abdullah dressed unless he's returning kicks. We know we're getting out of Abdullah, not much. We know we're getting out of Theo Riddick, a little bit more than Abdullah. I want to see what they can do with Tion Green, because I think with this offseason coming up, Ben, you and I have talked about it before, I think running back is a high priority in the draft. Mm-hmm. I really do. So if Tion Green ends up having a good game and he ends up looking good, then that really kind of reduces the need of a running back in the draft. Not abolishes it, just kind of reduces it. Because if Tion Green come out and be a feature back and actually look good, then fine. But I really want to see them feature Tion Green a lot this week. I really do. And the other thing, it's nothing Detroit related, but everybody knows the story now of James Harrison to the Patriots. And this just disgusts me on a human being level. Like, I've seen a lot of attacks on James Harrison for signing with the Patriots. Well, the Steelers cut him. What do you expect him to do? Like, the guy wants to play. He wants to contribute. It's a perfect fit because New England needs a linebacker with Van Noy and somebody else being hurt for the year. So they need a player. It's a perfect fit. He's going to be on a pitch count. It's for the two of them. It's a match made in heaven. Why is he being attacked? Would you have the same issue if somebody cut a player and the Steelers went out and signed that player? No. To me, it's just ridiculous, and I've seen a lot of negativity and a lot of hate being spewed towards James Harrison for the signing, and a lot of it coming from within the organization. And it's just sad to see. I mean, it's a business. I mean, if Harrison really did ask for his release 3 times because he wasn't being used and it wasn't being granted by the Steelers, then Harrison has every right to do what he did, go out and sign with the Patriots. And you know, it's just funny he went from a team that could win a championship to a team that's probably going to win the championship. So, I mean, I think that's why people are so upset, because of all teams he could have signed with, he signed with the Patriots. Well, he wants another shot at the ring, period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just think it's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, like, here's the thing I find ridiculous, is everyone being like, oh, the Patriots just signed him for intel. No, Bill Belichick's pretty good at scheming, and he can beat the Steelers and beats the Steelers often. So
yeah, and they use a number system, which changes at halftime anyways, according to the flow of the game. So that's irrelevant.
Well, right, but that's what, like, I read that, I'm just like, maybe if the Patriots couldn't beat the Steelers, sure, but they can beat the Steelers. Like, I don't know how much intel you're really pulling by getting James Harrison. I mean, it was really strange that Harrison went unclaimed on waivers. And my reaction was just flabbergasted, and I'll quote myself. It was, how? Like, how does any playoff contending team not sign this guy? I mean, all you have to do is look at his workouts alone to see how freakish this guy is. The guy is 40 years old and still plays at a relatively high level. I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
like,
he does.
Right.
You're right.
And so it's like, how does no one put a waiver claim? Or just put a waiver claim on him so, like, a team like the Patriots don't get the guy. Like, come on. Like, simple front office things, because you can have the guy for a week or two and then, again, drop him again and be like, okay, done. You know, yes, we only signed him to make sure he wouldn't play in New England. Like, why didn't Cleveland sign him to help with Myles Garrett? Because you have Myles Garrett and him on the other side. Maybe they don't go 0-16. I don't know. It's just some of the outrage or fake outrage or whatever with the signing. It doesn't surprise me, but it's just baffling. It is. But I guess I also have one last thing to quickly hit on. Do you want Matthew Stafford benched and have, because this is something that has been talked about a little bit, would you want Stafford benched for the last game of the year just so you can see what you have in Jake Rudock, or would you want Stafford playing the whole time?
I think I addressed that earlier. I don't know, man. I'm of a split mind. I'm not going to have an issue if they trot him out there and they're trying to win and trying to sweep the Packers. I don't have an issue with that, but I also don't have an issue if they say, you know what, let's not risk him. Let's just sit him down, see what Jake and I was going to say Kaya, but he's gone. See what Jake Rudock and whoever the guy off the street to be the backup is going to be. Let's see what they can do. Either way, I don't really have an issue with it, but I'd rather see if they're gonna go all out and want to step on Green Bay's throats, then yeah, play them. But I also don't have a problem with them sitting him if that's what they decide to do.
Yeah, interesting. Because to me, I think it's ridiculous if you bench Stafford. Because again, rare opportunity to sweep Green Bay. I don't care if Aaron Rodgers is healthy or not. Do it. I mean, it's another feather in your cap, Jim Caldwell, if you want to stay the head coach of the Detroit Lions. And who knows, maybe next week we will dive in hardcore into the quote-unquote coaching search. But outside of that, that's all the time that we have for you on this week's Lions SRD. We will be back in 2018 because it will be that time of year, basically. Lions will play on Sunday, and, well, Monday is New Year's Day. So we will definitely be back with a new Lions SRD. If you're not listening to any other shows on the network, like Out of Bounds, Spinning the Wheels, the SRD Road Show, the Set Piece, Laugh Tracks, basically, Talk Nerdy to Me, anything that we have on our networks, give it a try, give it a listen, and just based on the algorithm, give us 5 stars on iTunes so other people can find what you like. That's all we simply ask for. There's a new Tigers SRD out where Roger and Chris talk with someone who's really, really interesting on Twitter. He basically finds historic photos of the Tigers, and that's just going to be a good listen. So stop by, listen to that, and like I said, just rate us high on we're on Spotify, which we're the only local podcast network to be on Spotify. So rate us high there, Stitchler, wherever you listen to us, just so that other people can find what you like. It's that simple. Outside of that, we hope your 2017 was awesome. I know at least for me, it was pretty good. Having Marty again here for the second straight year was nice. And we will be back next week, which will be 2018. So, Marty, I'll let you say goodbye to the people. What do we say?
And we say goodnight. Good.
This has been an SRD production.